Welcome back, everybody, to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Cale Zeldin, and we are here for show number 11. Rod, how you doing today?
11, man, that's amazing.
11.
We've gotten this far.
Yeah.
And I'm doing great. Let me tell you, I started out this morning in New Orleans. I walk out of the front door.
Can't be bad if you started out in New Orleans.
No. My friends, they live on Audubon Park. I walk out of the house to go get in my car, and I'm hit by this curtain of sweet olive aroma. Oh my gosh. It was like, I'm sorry, Cale, I know you're from Louisiana too, but nothing smells like sweet olive in the spring. The morning was damp and heavy and wet. There was Spanish moss hanging off the trees. It was glorious. And then I came back to Baton Rouge, and now here we are.
And back to reality. So, well, look, today I'd like to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about the return of Jordan Peterson and the various podcasts he's been doing, and one in particular we'll talk about. I'd like to talk a little bit about your trip to Birmingham. It sounds like it was just what the doctor ordered. And then lastly, I'd like to wrap up here with maybe some tentative thoughts on the whole U.S. military versus Tucker Carlson event that is still unfolding in an interesting sort of way. So that's what we're going to do today, folks, and we'll just jump right into it. So, all right. So, Rod, you've mentioned in your writing before that, you don't really consider yourself a Jordan Peterson devotee, but he's someone you find intriguing and interesting. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against Jordan Peterson at all. Every time I've heard him speak, I've been impressed by what he has to say. I'm just not one of these people who has to listen to everything that comes out from him. But the thing that has always interested me about Jordan Peterson is how is it that this nerdy Canadian psychologist who's got this very high-pitched nasal voice, how is it that this man has been able
the Kermit the Frog voice that people like to comment on? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so how is it that this man has managed to reach an audience, especially young men, that the church has not been able to reach? I find it fascinating, and I also find it interesting how so many people just hate him. They can't stand him. And I listen to him, I'm like, why do you dislike this man so much? He's talking, sometimes you get a little of the Jungian stuff, but mostly he's just talking about wisdom, the sort of things that my dad used to say in a different mode, of course, because Jordan Peterson's an academic psychologist. My dad was my dad, but it's wisdom. And yet there's so many people who feel so threatened by it in this culture.
It's funny, I think I would consider myself more of a devotee. I wouldn't say that I listen to everything, but I've listened to quite a bit. He's been sort of my company as I make my daily constitutional, either a walk or a run with the dogs
toilet?
Early in the morning. No. It's a walk, Mr. Rod. It's a walk, Mr. Rod.
Is there something you want to we need to talk about?
No. Don't
Jordan
go there.
Peterson does not go to the toilet with Cale Zeldin.
Not at all. No, Jordan Peterson, in my little earbuds that I take with me on my walks, he's my constant companion. And so, in fact, I think I need to blame you. You were the person, I think it was on your blog, you had made a, this was back in the day, you had made a post when he appeared on the Kathy Newman show.
Oh, yeah.
It's a British television show, and she's fairly well known. And anyway, it was this sort of the famous gotcha interview, and that was my first introduction to him. I had heard of him before when he was fighting the whole C-16 bill in Canada, which was about making it illegal to misgender and to use the incorrect pronouns or something like that. And he really kind of put his foot down originally and say, by characterizing that as compelled speech. And so I remember at the time thinking like, all right, well, fine. I'm glad some academic finally is speaking against some of the silliness, but it's really not my thing, whatever it is. But when I started, when I came across the biblical lectures, as you and I have talked about before, that was really, I was like, well, this is a different cat. He's doing different things. So anyway, long story short is I'm a fan. I really am. I'm a I wouldn't say that I've got, signed autographed copies of his books in my house, but I think he is the real deal. And the reason why I think he is so effective in speaking to younger people and men in particular, although it's a little bit of a misdirection or indirection because YouTube is so heavily male. But whatever. Clearly, he's popular with young men in particular. Is I think that he taps into that very un-baby boomer thing, which is sort of received story and received wisdom. You mentioned this kind of this wisdom tradition, and so he even says that a lot of people in his audience will tell him, well, I really like what you have to say because it's like you're able to say stuff that I already kind of know, but you can say it in such a way that is inspiring and compelling. And he chuckled about that. And he says, yeah, well, that's what I'm doing. I that means I'm resonating with something that's received. And I wonder, but the vitriol, I think that you talk about, I mean, like the sort of the anti-Jordan Peterson vitriol is real.
Yeah, I think people perceive him, people on the left, the cultural left, perceive him as a reactionary force, as someone who is trying to revive things that we've gotten beyond.
So technically reactionary? Is that you're using reactionary in that kind of technical way that Marxists talk about reactionaries?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they see him as a cultural reactionary that he's we should have gotten past all these things that he's talking about. Yeah. And the weird thing is, Peterson doesn't strike me as any kind of cultural conservative straight out of central casting. He's not that. No. But he's a guy who comes at it from the point of view of myths and wisdom, the wisdom tradition. And this is where his conservatism comes because, as you indicate, Cale, what he's saying is, we thought we had outgrown all this, but we can't outgrow it because this is who we are. This is what it means to be human. These stories, they tell us how reality is constituted.
Yeah, he does, and in that sense, I see what you mean. He's kind of like a throwback figure because he's sort of telling throwback stories. Now, I think what has struck me, especially in this second round of Jordan Peterson, because as I'm sure people in our audience know that he was out. I mean, he got knocked out for over a year, and he was had developed an addiction to anxiety medication, benzodiazepine, I think it is what it was, and had a wicked time getting off of this stuff. And as someone who's watched a lot of his videos, what really strikes you when you watch his new videos, which have started basically at the new year, he's kind of come back, and in the last couple of weeks, he's really put out a bunch of videos. He's put out a video with Brett Weinstein and Dave Rubin and Gad Saad and Matthew McConaughey and one of them, and so so he's really been doing a lot of work. But what is so striking when you see his videos now is how beat up he is. Yeah, and I don't mean to say that in a mean way. I mean, but the man looks tough, like roughed up.
This guy's been through it. I saw the one he did the other day with Jonathan Pajou, who's one of my favorites, and I had not seen Jordan Peterson since he came back, and I first started hearing the Jonathan Pajou podcast I got on Spotify or somewhere. Yeah. But then when I got home, I wanted to go back to it and read and blog about it. And Cale, the man, he was always a thin man. He is gaunt. When he says on the video that he says, I'm only at 5%, you believe him. This is a guy.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, he looks like he has stared into the abyss and he came back, but looks like he's not quite sure that he is back.
Well, especially in that Jonathan Pajou video, and honestly, if the folks in the audience have not seen that listening to it is great. I did that, and then I happened to catch a couple of YouTube clips, video clips, and I was like, whoa. You could really see the pain. It did not, this is not an affectation, and I was talking with my friend Steve Skojic the other day, and he was talking about the same thing, and it popped in my head, is this what Job would have looked like at the end?
Yeah.
Like someone who has really, really suffered, and so for me, he kind of is this sort of Job figure in the sense of the suffering. But what really struck me about the Pajou conversation is, number one, Pajou is he's a great conversationalist. If you folks don't know Jonathan Pajou, you definitely need to check out his YouTube channel and his blogging at The Symbolic World. Rod, you've been on his show, I think, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, when you were doing your Live Not by Lies
Yeah,
media.
Pajou is a really interesting guy. He's an Orthodox Christian, a convert to Orthodox Christianity, an artist. He carves icons, and he talks about what he calls a symbolic world, and which is how he intersects with Jordan Peterson, because they talk about the meaning of myth and symbolism, the deep meaning of myth and symbolism. But they ended up talking the other day. I decided to listen to it because I like Jonathan Pajou. I think he says interesting things. I think so does Jordan Peterson. So I listened to this to the podcast on the way back home from a long trip I took to Birmingham, Alabama the other day. And around the 20-minute mark, Cale, Jordan Peterson starts to cry, or comes close to crying.
Close to it, yeah.
And you're just like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And what is he crying about? He's crying because he's thinking about whether or not Jesus Christ is who he said he is.
Yeah.
And he talks about in very Jordan Peterson language, like where the narrative world meets the objective world.
Correct. Yeah, that's the phrase he uses. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of I was thought of Kierkegaard talking about the incarnation of Christ as the God-man was what Kierkegaard calls the absolute paradox, where the infinite becomes finite, where the eternal becomes temporal. Well, that's what Jordan Peterson's talking about, and Peterson starts getting emotional about it because he says that what if it's true?
Yeah, and he's really chewing on this. Like, it's like when this, like, the symbolic world all of a sudden is the incarnate world too. And could it be? Could it be true? And he says, I can't even. He says for a phrase like, I can't. It's almost too much for me to even contemplate if it is true. And then and I want to go back to that in just a minute, but then, because I think Pajou handles it so wonderfully, but, he starts to say, well, it doesn't look like other Christians behave as if it were true.
Right.
And of course, that's that moment where you're like, yeah, right. You're correct. That is spot on. And I think that is always the damning reality of those of us in the church, right?
But what I love about what Jordan Peterson said there is he has taken, by what we can see there, and the way he puts it, and how emotional he is, he has taken the sense of awe that all of us should have at even the thought of Almighty God. He's taken it seriously. And I think it's almost like he's seen the burning bush, and that man is either going to convert to Christianity or he is going to kill himself, because he can't live in this middle ground. And I don't say that lightly. I think this is a man who understands the terror of existence without meaning. Right. And I think he has really seen, and this I'm projecting here, but just trying to estimate from what we saw. He sees what it's like to live a Nietzschean life of nihilism, and I think he is headed. When I look at him and Pajou, I think of Tolkien and Lewis.
It's a great story.
Tolkien was talked to Lewis and was basically, we'd call it evangelizing him. Though it's hard to see these two Oxford dons.
I know,
but Lewis wanted to believe, but said no. It's Christianity. It's just another myth. And Tolkien said, well, no, it's the myth that's true. Yeah. And I think that's where Jordan Peterson is headed.
I do too. And you know what? I think that, not unique to me, some of my friends and commentators have said this, but there's this remarkable honesty, intellectual honesty in a person like Jordan Peterson. And I think in a similar vein, though temperamentally completely different, somebody like Tom Holland. If you've seen some of Tom Holland's, the author of Dominion and other things, we've mentioned him before. He's kind of sort of one of our favorites as well. There's this just real honesty about reality. That the story of Jesus, right, is the most compelling and world-altering story, and you just get the sense from both of these figures that they have to admit that it's more than just what many kind of scoff at. And I think of some of Jordan Peterson's detractors. I think of some of Jordan, these hit pieces that the legacy media has run and continues to run about Jordan Peterson. And as someone like myself, I've read his books, I've listened to tons of his podcasts. He's a serious person, he's not flippant. He's capable of levity, and I think he's not humorless, but he's a very serious person. And when I see these ridiculous hit pieces on him, it really kind of drives me up the wall, because to me it's revelatory of his critics' just sort of flippancy. We live in this kind of flippant world where you know that there's no such thing as wisdom. Like what do I have
right.
to,
And
like
we
what
laugh
do I,
at it.
yeah, and it's like we sneer at it, we're ironic about it. It's like the joke about the joke about the joke, and everything becomes a deep fried meme. And then you have these sort of very these journalists who are very smart people, and they take themselves very seriously, and they have a blue check mark next to their name on Twitter, and the whole bit.
Hey, so do I.
I know. Fine. Show off. Right. The verified nobody right here. Your host, Kale Zeldin, verified nobody. But they're not serious people. Not in the way. And so to see them kind of write these sneering, dismissive pieces like, well, he seems to know a lot about Hogwarts or whatever. It's like you're not being real. You're not being real.
Like here's why I think he cut through that. First of all, unlike them, he's deeply sincere, deeply earnest, deeply unironic. Not humorless, but unironic, right. And he's not intimidated by that. Plus, think about what first brought him to our attention. It was, you said, when he stood up against this trans bill in Canada.
Yeah.
This is a guy who was willing to suffer for what he believed. And as he said back then, I will call any student what they want to be called, but I will not be told how I have to address everybody. And it goes back to this. So one of my constant themes, and something we've talked about here, is about how the willingness to suffer for what you believe in, that's where you gain authority. And he's done it, brother. And now,
I love that idea of authority. Yeah, and maybe I'm having a deja vu moment with you about authority, but this idea that authority it's like you got it and you know it when you see it. And like when you watch that man do his thing, like he speaks from some sense, like there's a well of realness or authenticity and authority and power, when he starts talking that way.
Well, he's got what we call charisma, but the word itself has been so abused, and we think of charisma as now sex appeal, but that's not the original meaning. He has a charism, and he speaks with authority because he exudes authority, and his authority comes, I think, from his authenticity.
Well,
and the fact.
And he just know, he's deeply knowledgeable about his stuff. Like he's widely read, deeply read. And, when he starts going off, if you see some of these recordings of his shows and especially his stage, when he went on that big book tour a couple of years ago, I mean, the man is he's like a jazz musician. He is, and if you know anything about jazz, that jazz musicians make it look like they're just sort of going off into sort of crazy space, but it comes from a deep knowledge of music theory and scales and the tradition, right? And he's got this, I think the Spanish call it duende. It's this kind of indwelling charged spirit that's a little bit something. Anyway, but so to see that man, right? I think what struck me and you about the Pajou show, to see that man who was capable of marshaling such presence and authority and talent, sort of in that moment, to see him broken and honest in this exchange with Jonathan Pajou was really striking. And Jonathan, at a crucial point, and this might be our segue point here, Rod. Jonathan at a crucial point says, you can't just live in your head. You have to be embodied and embedded in some kind of community. And then Peterson says, well, I sort of have that. And Pajou says, no, you don't. You don't
Yeah.
have that. Like, you don't go, there's not a place of worship. You have your fans, and that's something, but that's not the same thing as community, right? Like that enfleshed surrounding of others and all of their mess and all of their realness. And so I was thinking about your trip that you took to Birmingham this past weekend, which is probably the first trip that you've really taken,
Yeah.
In quite some time. So tell us what you
Sure.
did and
Yeah.
how it relates to our first part here.
It was such a great trip, Cale, and the thing that made it so great for me, aside from the talks I got to give around Live Not by Lies, was just being with other guys and other serious Christian men. I was invited there by a ministry we call Tactical Faith. It's a parachurch ministry that's run by a guy named Matt Burford, and Matt's one of these interesting guys. He's about your age, I'd say, and he a Southern Baptist pastor, and he just has one of he has what everybody else wants. This is a man who is at home in the world, completely humble, unpretentious, and a lot of fun. He invited me up, and I gave three talks while I was there. And one to a group at an Anglican church, and one at the church hall of an Orthodox church, just about Live Not by Lies. What was so great, we were in this Anglican church, and this had been advertised. I was there with Peter Leithart, the Presbyterian public intellectual. There were people from 8 different churches there. There were Orthodox, Catholic, Anglican, all kinds of evangelicals. And then at the very end, after Peter and I finished, the rector of the church, Father Michael Novotny, had everybody stand up, and we said the Our Father together. All these different Christians there. And people came up to me to get me to sign their book, and there were men and women, but men especially, talking about how much they needed that. And then we went out on Matt Burford took me and a few other men out shooting skeet just to do something. And all of these guys were like, this is great. We've been missing this. Well, you and I have talked offline about this sort of thing, Cale, about how much Christian men men in general in this society need each other's friendship and how hard it is to get. We talk and talk and talk about it, but then when you actually see the thing, I've got emails from people saying, I needed that. I really need. And they were talking about how the stuff I mentioned in my lectures about Father Kolakovich, the Catholic priest who organized the underground church resistance in Slovakia in the face of the opposition of his bishops who said, you're being alarmist. Well, I went on to talk about how one of the things I learned from the people in all Eastern European countries is the value of small groups and building that kind of solidarity and keeping one's hope alive. I feel like I experienced that in Birmingham this weekend. I came back a different man.
Wow. Well, what is that, right? I mean, if it's interesting, you have this experience of community that you've largely lacked. We're here at the year mark, roughly, give or take a day, of the COVID lockdowns, right? So it's the Ides of March or thereabouts, the day after, and it seems to be the thing that we all kind of know is missing, but we've all kind of said, well, what are you going to do?
Right.
And obviously this is in some sense, it's an artificial, block. But maybe connect that a little bit to what Pajou is trying to tell Peterson. Why is community, especially, when we talk about, living not by lies, we talk about, how to be a Christian in the world in 2021. Why is this community thing so important, and why is it the thing that we seem to lack so
right.
much?
Well, Pajou tells Peterson that he said, I'm not telling you to go to church, Jordan, because I want people to go to necessarily be moralized into going to church.
Right.
I'm telling you to go to church to be around other people because that's how reality is made.
Yeah.
We're made for communion with each other. And, you see this in Dante's Divine Comedy, in the Inferno, hell. In Inferno, everybody is completely isolated.
That's right.
You know, they're the perfectly isolated person. But in Purgatorio, those who have been redeemed, they're starting to rebuild human community. You know, they're all going on pilgrimage up the mountain, round and round the mountain. And instead of hating each other, as you see in Inferno, they're helping each other. You know,
and they sing together. Like there are all these moments in the Purgatory where they're singing together, which is, I think, such a powerful image of being oriented toward the same thing in a variety of parts, but performing kind of in unison. It's a perfect image, I think, of what community is.
I told this story as part of my talks in Birmingham about Live Not by Lies. I told a story about Jan Samulchik. He is a historian of the underground church I met when I was over in Bratislava doing research for my book. But back in the 1980s, he was a college student and a Catholic who got involved with the underground church. He was part of a small cell of 3 or 4 other guys, all Catholics who had a key role to play in distributing samizdat, underground illegal gospels, prayer books, catechisms, things like that. And they couldn't know a lot of things about it because the way the underground church was set up, they wanted to make sure that if any of them got found out and got arrested, they would not be able to rat out the others because they just wouldn't know this stuff. So what Jan Samulchik and his buddies would do is they would come over like every week or every 2 weeks to this one house where a secret priest lived, disguised as a worker, and they would find on a table a stack of Bibles or gospel, whatever had been printed in the previous week. Their job was to bind it together and distribute it. Jan told me that he only found freedom. This is growing up under communism. He only found freedom when he was with his small group of men. Wow. They were all dedicated to the same cause and really dedicated, because if they had ever been caught, they were all going to prison. They were dedicated to the same cause. They took risks for Christ. And because they lived in a society full of lies, when they were together, knowing that they could trust each other, they had this bond of brotherhood, this fellowship, that was freedom. And Jan told me, and when he told me this, when we were standing in a secret underground room where all these things were printed back in the day that Jan didn't even know was there. It is under a basement and through a tunnel. He told me, that if it hadn't been for getting together with these guys week in and week out, taking these risks together, growing in our faith and in God and our trust in each other, I would not have had the courage to go out on the public square 8 years later when the underground church called the first mass demonstration in Czechoslovakia since the Soviet invasion in '68. I wouldn't have had the courage to go out there. So young men, I could tell listening to me talk about that, they really, something in them clicked. We want to be heroes. And this is what Jordan Peterson is speaking to
I was just going to say, the thing that Peterson always talks about is he says we have a drive toward meaning. And he says the thing that always, there are certain things that he knows that he's hitting the mark, but when he talks to a crowd of people and everybody is dead silent, and the thing that always makes people dead silent is like taking responsibility for your own being and orienting that suffering, which is inevitable, towards something that is purposeful and meaningful. And so I just hearing the story about the samizdat, and you start thinking like, why would you, like what is it? Like it's a couple of Xerox pages of the Gospel of John or something, and like what is it? And you can see, well, it gives you like a reason for being, for living, for breathing, for eating, like for keeping the thing going. And I think what Peterson speaks to is that we've been bequeathed a world of cynical nihilism, that nothing means anything, that your masculinity is a scourge on the planet, and you should just crawl back into the basement from whence you've come and plug into online gaming and just float off into the into the nothing. And Peterson says, well, no, Peterson's like, that's not what you're for. Which is so he laughs, right? It's like, you would think that the most unpopular thing in the world would be to take responsibility for yourself, shame, but it's not. It's because we are created for meaning. Yeah. And he really gets that.
And what's so interesting about you saying that is this is what one of the reasons that those young men involved in the underground church, they found meaning there, and they found something worth risking their lives for, and risking their lives together. It was like a fellowship of the ring kind of thing. And I understand why we've talked about this before, how Camilla Bendova, who raised 6 Catholic children in Prague under communism, how one of the things she told me that she did to prepare them to live in truth was to read to them all the time, and especially Tolkien, because
notice what that's essentially about, right? It's about heroism.
Yep.
And heroism is about doing the difficult thing for like the right reasons. And
Right.
I think I was talking to a Catholic friend of mine today, and we were both sort of talking about what it was like to watch the young pre-Parkinson's John Paul II,
Right.
that young, to see him and to see him go back to Poland and stick it right up, the communist, officials' faces, and didn't do anything to get arrested, but just his mere presence was like that. That was the kind of heroism. That was the kind of faith that you die for.
Mhm.
Like, what an inspiration! And I think it's of a piece here.
Right. And, you and I were talking earlier today on the telephone about how so many of our institutions today have lost the idea of being for something, or having a mission. Well, it's true for individuals too. And, I think that this is one reason that there's so much despair, especially among young men and young people in general. They don't feel that their lives are for anything other than self-expression, which is like,
the worst pathetic thing. No, I exactly right. That nobody asks themselves the question, or no older people ask younger people to ask themselves this question. It's like, what are you for? Like, and you're not for the 9-to-5 world. You're not for the college admissions ticket. You're not for these things. Because those are nothings. Like those come, they go.
Right.
It's chance, it's luck. It doesn't really mean anything. But I thought a couple of weeks ago you blogged about Rudy Giuliani's daughter, who sort of came out. I forget what magazine it was in, but was
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair, right? Oh,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
Vanity Fair. That's well named in that particular moment, right? And she was talking about sort of the wonders she had finally discovered herself by being a third in threesomes.
A unicorn.
A unicorn. Sorry, yeah. Well, the technical.
Oh yeah, no,
stuff.
you're right. But this is how they make it. They enchant it. I'm a unicorn.
Right.
I sleep with 2 people at once.
Yeah. So then the question. So this is what you're for. So this is what you're for. Millions of years of evolution have come and brought us to this point in which you can now perform your God ordained role as a unicorn, the third wheel in a threesome. And, I'm sorry if the sneering is coming across the camera right now, but it's because I'm sneering it. It's an atrocious lie to tell people. It's atrocious performative. It makes me so angry and sad, right? It's sort of this, whatever that thing is, when you're angry and sad at the same time, because that's not what you're for.
Right. No.
You're not some extension of somebody else's masturbatory fantasy. Like it's so sad. And yet here we are. And so we don't ask these meaningful questions, do we?
No, we really don't.
And the church doesn't, right? And that's what I think drives you and me so upset about our churches, is that they too just don't even ask the question. Don't pose it. Don't challenge us.
Yeah, I remember, and you probably do too, when Jordan Peterson appeared at Liberty University.
Oh yeah.
A young man came running toward the stage, crying like, "Dr. Peterson, help me! I'm not well."
Right.
And it was a young man who had mental health issues. It was known on campus, but the guy they got him down on the ground, and Peterson knelt over and so compassionately began to minister to him. I don't know what he said to him. Yeah. Peterson's not a Christian, right. But it was so beautiful to me that this young man, in all his suffering, he ran to Peterson, saying, please help me, please deliver me. In that sense, Peterson was a Christ figure.
Absolutely.
Please, dude, don't misunderstand me, listeners. I'm not saying he was Christ, but he was that kind of figure that, please heal me. You have what it needs, what I need to be healed.
Yeah.
And notice, Cale, going back to what we started out talking about how people just hate Peterson. One of my favorite stories in the gospel is when Jesus goes to the town and there's a demoniac who's been shackled among the tombs for years because he's out of his mind, demon possessed, and people in the town have put him away from them.
And he's broken out of the shackles on a number of occasions. That's how strong he was in his possession.
Right. But so Jesus casts the demons out of him and sends them into the swine, and they go over the hill. Well, you would think that the village would be happy about that. Like, oh my God, what have you done?
Look what we just saw. Yeah.
You set him free. Yeah. Nope. They say, get out of here. Get out. You're freaking us out. Get out of here. And I think that is one reason, one of those weird stories where you wouldn't make that up, because if it were being made up, if it were just a standard story, they would have had the town be converted by what Jesus did. But it's so human that they didn't, that they were afraid to be healed. They preferred the pain they knew to the possibility of there being a revelation among them of something beyond them, of something divine. And that, I think, is one of the things Peterson's struggling with himself. He wants to believe that there is something more here, but he just can't get there yet for reasons I don't really know.
Well, you're so right. I mean, those are those parts about the gospel, those really annoying parts about the gospel that, are just too perfect, too perfectly wrong, right? I mean, you're right. It'd be the stuff you'd cut off. It's like, oh, what is this? Like, get it off the store. We need, you can imagine a Hollywood producer sort of cutting the script and like, this is, cut that out. No, we need singing, dancing, rejoicing at this moment. And it's just, that's, I find the Gospels just so continually weird in that way that is the way that a real story is, weird, and even even like aspects of Jordan Peterson's own story. In one of the podcasts, he tells the whole story about what happened, and he gets into it a little bit in the book, the new book, the Beyond Order, and it's just these strange things that happen in the way that only in reality do these sort of things happen.
Well, he says in that podcast, you might remember, he says that, and this is what sort of breaks him into start crying. He talks about how he's experienced Jungian synchronicities. In Jung's thought, a synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. Yeah. Peterson said this has happened to him so many times, so there's got to be meaning. And it's happened to me too, and I always think of that as like God winking at me.
Yeah. You've been talking a lot about this sort of stuff with your Substack. These sort of these re-enchantment moments, right? But anyway, I'm struck by the things that you were telling me about this trip to Birmingham, because you found yourself re-embedded sort of amongst fellow travelers, re-embedded in this way, and that you kind of find that's the sort of the counterintuitive reality, right? You find yourself when you're amidst a multitude, a group of like-minded people.
And I think, Cale, too, it was, one thing that made it stronger, made it feel the effect stronger, was the fact that we've been so isolated for so long. Yeah. I was able to do this in Birmingham because all the speeches were socially distanced. I recently got my vaccine, but it hasn't really kicked in yet. Mm-hmm. But the going outside to do shooting with the small group of guys, that was something that that was just. It wasn't really about the shooting. Yeah, the shooting was fun, but it was about being together. And Matt Burford, my host, had this great idea of doing a festival called Bigfoot, because they were all teasing me about my Bigfoot obsession. Yeah. They had T-shirts made, but Matt wants to have a festival called Bigfoot where small Orthodox Christian men come together in Alabama, and we have some talks, kind of like Walker Percy weekend. Yeah. We have some talks, but we also have just a lot of hanging out and being guys together and just rebuilding that male friendship. The weird thing is, I don't know why I haven't been able to do it here where I live. I know guys, I go to church with guys, but I think part of being here was not only are we all living under COVID, but I think also we, without realizing it, we get into these ruts and forget what is possible.
Right. And I think that that's the double-edged sword. I can sit here and complain about, the technologies that, but I use them all the time, right? I'm very online and these sort of things. And I think you can kind of kid yourself into thinking that you're having community. You can kid yourself into thinking you're having connections. And to a certain extent, you do have those connections, but there's really no substitute for the physical embodied, presence with people in a community. It's just, there's no substitute for it. So,
well, and there's something about all male community and all female community too. But I think that there's something that women need that can only be met by an all-female community, and vice versa. Not all the time, mind you. I'm not talking, but I'm talking about being able to get together and just be with people of your own sex. I think about when I was a kid growing up. This was not even problematic. I mean, of course that was the case, and the men would usually go to the hunting camp.
That's right. The camps.
Well, hunting didn't mean a lot to me, but I'm still a guy. I may not like to hunt, but I like to be around other guys, and that's normal and good. And I think that we have lost, and this might be a good Jordan Peterson point. You would know, you read him more than I do. We've lost that aspect of reality. There's something about our embodied reality, our lived experience as men and as women, that affirms the goodness of being with our own kind. From time to time, we get things out of it. It's not an exclusion thing, but it's like not a running away from the other, but a running towards. And I wonder, we were talking earlier about the whole thing, military with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
I wonder, I know that we have forgotten, for ideological reasons, the truths of our embodiment in reality. And do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I think Peterson would probably argue there's kind of been an overcorrection, right? If we had the sort of the hyper rigidity of sex roles and the hyper rigidity of sex exclusionary spaces, we've overcorrected to the point where we simply pretend that there are no differences, right? And and we've got, even it's swung so far over that we're even saying that there's really no such thing as biology, like that you used to be able to say, like, well, you can pretend up to a certain point, but a guy's a guy and a girl's a girl, right? I mean, these basic things. Well, obviously we live in this moment where even that is considered hate speech. I mean, this podcast right now could be flagged as hate speech because we are reaffirming, as Douglas Murray would say, we're simply reaffirming what everybody believed up until yesterday. And so here we are in the military. Is not only is it not an exception to this, but it has become the spear, the tip of the spear for this new experiment. And I was really struck. I'm not a cable news watcher. I'll occasionally catch clips on YouTube after the fact, and this thing was going along. This Tucker Carlson thing was going around.
What is this Tucker Carlson thing?
Yeah. All right. So sorry. Yeah. So he pointed out some I forget if it was about the military outfits or what's.
He was talking about the feminization of the American military. This is all part of the general wokeness thing.
Right.
And he said that the Chinese military is trying to be more affirmatively masculinist, and but our military is going the other way. And he talked about how Biden was saying how great it is we need combat armor, for that fits women, and we do. If women are going into combat, they deserve the armor. But the question is, what the hell are we doing sending women into combat? And they had to have flight suits for pregnant women, and what Carlson, the essence of what he was saying, he didn't say women shouldn't be in the military.
Right.
They've said that. It's not what he said. He said that we have lost the thread here. Our military has. It has forgotten that its number one goal is to fight and win wars, not to be social engineers, not to accommodate, things that undermine our warfighting capacity. which does happen. There was a woman named Kristen Gleast, I think her name is. She was the first female captain, now Army captain, first female infantry officer. And she wrote a piece the other day talking about how the women in the military who want to go into combat need to be able to pass the Army fitness test because their survival and the survival of those in their unit depends on it. But now our new woke military is talking about changing the rules because women can't pass the fitness test, the gender-neutral fitness test. And this is what Tucker Carlson was complaining about, but suddenly it blows up, and the senior brass of the most powerful military that ever existed turned all their rhetorical guns on a cable news host. All the years on cable TV when they would call, the military baby killers or whatever. No, the military stayed silent, as it should. It's not its place to do that. But allow a conservative cable talk host to question its wokeness, that's the unforgivable sin. And I think this is a hugely important moment in our culture that they did that, and that the left has been defending the military against the Tucker Carlson menace. If the military had done this to Rachel Maddow, let's say she had criticized them fairly or unfairly about something, and suddenly you have the defense secretary and all these generals and others attacking Rachel Maddow, the left would be outraged, and they would be right to be outraged.
They'd be correct, right? And the line would be something on the effect, these are political civilian matters, and there needs to be a dividing line between, the armed forces and these political fights, and that's correct, right? That is the correct line to take. That the military cannot become politicized, right? And the thing that drives me nuts, and this dovetails what we were talking about earlier, it's like you need to ask the simple question, like, what is this institution for, right? And and they're not answering the question.
No,
right?
no.
That the platitudes sort of slide in nicely.
Diversity is our strength.
Yeah, diversity is our strength. Like, really, that's our strength, right? I'm not saying, look, you can argue that diversity is a virtue. Fine, we can have that conversation, but is that actually our strength? You're you're training, to use lethal force, right? To against an enemy to protect, your interest, right? It's pretty simple.
In fact, in 2015, the U.S. Marine Corps did a study showing, comparing the performance of all-male platoons to mixed male-female platoons. Yeah. And it wasn't even close.
Right,
the all-male platoons were so much better, not because these are bad women, but because women, just biological reality has not blessed them with the same sort of muscle strengths that men have. But we can't see that reality because this is part of this battle against reality that we're fighting all over this culture with trans and all of it. And here's what's so interesting to me, that who would have thought, Cale, we would get to a point where the military and big business figured out how to buy off the left. The military and big business for all of our lives have been like the big bugbears of the progressives. Yeah. Well, now, because they have managed, big business and the military has managed to figure out that if you say nice things about progressive causes, then you can get away with anything. You don't have to worry about criticism from them. And they know, big business and military know, that the right is not going to criticize them either, because we don't know how to do that. And so they figured out how to perfectly game the system. Yeah, that's the real coup, right? The real coup is that the sort of the quintessential boomer perspective was you hated corporations and you hated the military, and here we are where they've captured the military and the corporations, as we all get ready for June. So I mean, I don't know where this stands. I mean, I'm concerned, frankly, that the military is going after Tucker Carlson again, not because I'm like a Tucker Carlson stan guy. I mean, fine. I appreciate some of his perspective. I appreciate the fact that he talks back to these things. I appreciate, that we finally have someone sort of on the right who is
gutsy enough to call out the military and call out some of these, these sacred cows that have been on the right since the heady days of President Reagan. I
Yeah.
appreciate that from Tucker Carlson, but the response is really strange.
Yeah.
It's really strange, and I know that there's some nuance. I saw some of that published on your blog today, Rod. But honestly, on the whole, it's very disconcerting that the military is engaging in what is essentially sort of cultural battles. Like,
That's right. That's right. Well, one of the things that I tell audiences is that a cultural Waterloo for social conservatives came in 2015 when the big business came down in a massive way in the state of Indiana, trying to get the state to repeal the state version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, because big business had not engaged in culture war in that way ever. And it was no looking back after that, because in our country, when you capture business on your side, it's over. Well, this is a smaller thing than what big business did in Indiana in 2015, but it's on the same spectrum. The first time that anybody, from what I've been able to read, can remember the military engaging itself in culture war like this. Now, it'd be fine if the military said, this journalist, Tucker Carlson, he has this wrong, this wrong, this wrong.
Yeah, fine.
That's fine.
Yeah, issue that. That's fine. I mean,
but that's not what they did. They went after him hammer and tongs. And I think it's a really dangerous sign for where things are headed. And I also put on my blog today, on my TAC blog, something from the U.S. Naval Academy, their recommended reading list for their teachers for diversity and inclusion. Ibram Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, it's all this destructive woke poison, race poison from one side. There's no John McWhorter. There's nothing to counter that.
Yeah, it's a hit list of the who's of the most popular, and look, the goal of this is disunity. The goal of this is destruction. The goal of this is to say that there are things that are larger than the mission, right? If my mission, like, if I'm running a soccer team, right, my mission as a soccer team is to score more goals against the opposition than they score against me, right? If I then sort of muddy up that mission, say, yeah, well, maybe our mission is sort of to make sure that I've got three people of color that are on the defensive side, and I need to make sure that I've got two midfielders that are or that are women, and then if I start playing this sort of game, I'm not orienting my team toward the actual mission, which is to score more goals. I'm doing something else, and that's why I think I said to you earlier, I'm concerned that this is a security risk, honestly.
Of course, yeah, because you are not putting your best team out there, and you're lying to yourself. Because it's like late Soviet Union, there's a word I encountered last week in talking about all this called hyper-normalization. It's a term coined by a Russian political scientist to describe like the last decade or so of the Soviet Union before collapse, a time when everybody knew that everybody was lying about everything. And nobody cared, because the point was not to rock the boat, to keep this whole rickety thing where people lie rolling along until it finally fell apart. Well, it feels like we're in a hyper-normalization period here where we can't talk about things that go against the regnant ideology, which is wokeness of within our institutions. We can't talk about how having women in combat harms readiness because they're just not physically able to do what men can. We can't talk about the Georgetown law since we last talked. A teacher got fired because she noticed that the bottom part of her class, the bringing up the rear in her class, are mostly black students. And it didn't matter whether it was true or not.
Right.
The fact that she noticed got her fired, and it feels like it's turning like this throughout every institution in this society.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Just to be able to ask the question, right? Is it true? I think about the summer that we just lived through, and the aftermath of the George Floyd stuff. I mean, it's such an important question, right? Is it true? Because the truth actually does matter. And to me, and maybe this is sort of where we pull this to port, Rod. This calls to mind, your good friend Ross Douthat's work on decadence. Like, when the mission is no longer the mission, when the thing is no longer the thing, when the truth is no longer the truth, we've achieved a kind of exhausted
Mm-hmm.
cultural decadence, and in the decay of all of it. And it just seems institution after institution after institution is undergoing a kind of quickening of rot, a quickening of
Yeah.
decadence that is really quite something. I mean, I know I keep saying this. I'm very concerned, but I am, like, I'm legitimately worried that we're so all out of focus. We're so distracted that you know it's not a good place for us to be in.
No, but the good thing that one of the things that I learned from this Birmingham trip, to be around these other Christians who see things, I think clearly, or who want to see things clearly. We all know that we see impartially. I mean, we see things partially.
Yeah, right.
But we all have this sense, whatever our traditions, we all have this sense that, yeah, things are wrong, things are bad, things are falling apart, and we need each other.
Yeah.
Another thing too, maybe this is a good place to end, Cale, because it's a hopeful thing. My first night there in Birmingham, my host brought me together at a table with a Presbyterian man who teaches high school and a man named Jeremiah Castile. Jeremiah Castile is the team chaplain for the University of Alabama Crimson Tide, and former NFL player, and he was one of the pallbearers at Coach Bear Bryant's funeral because he played for Alabama. And Jeremiah, he must be about 60, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating guy. We just had a normal, good conversation, and then somehow the conversation turned to this, what some people call the supernatural, but we were talking about manifestations of the demonic and of the miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremiah told me a story. Again, I think he's a Baptist, right? Baptists don't often talk about this, but he told a story about how he was at he and another man were at a meeting in Orange Beach, Alabama once, and on the Alabama coast.
Yeah.
And his buddy said, Jeremiah, I see that woman over there in the wheelchair. I think we need to pray for her. I feel like God is telling me we need to pray for her. So Jeremiah, being Jeremiah, said, all right, let's do it. So he went over and asked the woman, may we pray for you? They said, sure. So time goes on, and I forget exactly what the contact between Jeremiah Castile and this woman was, but and her husband. But the woman and the husband ended up in Jeremiah's backyard at a party when Jeremiah's son Simeon was being drafted to the NFL.
Yeah.
And she got out of her wheelchair and stood up. And everybody, Jeremiah said, there was Holy Ghost chaos in my backyard. But the woman told him, said that, I'd been made paralyzed by a botched back operation, and I'd lost my faith. I tried to kill myself twice.
Wow.
But when you men came over and prayed for me, I regained my faith.
Wow.
And, as time went on, I was at home one morning, and I fell out of my wheelchair. My husband was at work. My kids were at school. And I said, God, what do I do? She said, I heard a voice say, get up and walk. So I got up and walked. And we wanted you all to be the first ones to know this before we told the world. I mean, it was incredible.
Yeah,
But Jeremiah telling that story there, my Baptist host said, we in the Southern Baptist world don't even have the language to talk about things like that. Cale, it made me so excited because Jeremiah's this, an older African-American man who normally doesn't talk about this sort of thing, but it came out there. And we all started talking about experiences we have had of God inbreaking in the world, of the eternal touching the temporal, and like what thing that made Jordan Peterson cry.
That's right.
And
I was just going to say that, yeah.
And we got out to the cars after dinner was over, and the Presbyterian man, the high school teacher, said, brothers, thank you for this. I needed it. I almost didn't come tonight, but I really needed this. And none of us had planned for that to happen. But the fact that Jeremiah and I, and later the Baptist guy, talked about things that had happened like that seemed to violate the natural order, but showed us, pointed as signs that God is real. And for me, Cale, it gave me hope because and it gave me a direction, a sense of confidence in what I'm about to do. My last two books, Benedict Option and Live Not by Lies, have been sounding the alarm. Yeah. But now I want to try to turn to something to help people to see amidst the darkness and chaos and confusion, to see order, to see light, to see God. We've got to be able to open our eyes to realize that the sort of thing that Jeremiah experienced praying for this woman, this is reality. This is not hyper reality, that this is part of the fabric of the universe, of this created universe. And I think that there are a lot of people out there, Cale. These are people who are drawn to Jordan Peterson, who doesn't talk about God like that, but these are people who are seeking a sign that things are better than what they are, that there is a better story out there, a more truthful story.
Yeah, and that the spirit, it's there's not this sort of this radical separation of spirit and matter. Like it's a oneness that we lack the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the faith to experience, and it's right there. And it's so easy, of course, to sort of fall off of that and just sort of get focused in on the here and the now and the ruts and this, that. But it's an impoverishment that we know, right? We know by experience. We know that we don't have to be stuck in that right. It's all around us.
Right. We get lost in everydayness. I think Kierkegaard talks about that, and that's one thing that encountering Kierkegaard in college back in the 80s was one thing that opened my eyes and opened my mind and my heart to the possibility of God being real for me. But it was terror, because I didn't have any kind of the existential terror that Jordan Peterson has before the possibility that God is true. But I also knew that that if God is who he says he is, and in the Christian tradition, I can't live the way I live.
That's right. Yeah.
And I didn't want to give it up just then. But so I started going back in college to a church near campus where they wouldn't hassle me about, all this other, my sex life or any of this stuff. But I knew it was fake. It wasn't real, because I went there, and this is not a judgment on the faith of these people. Yeah. But I knew that I was fooling myself, that I was looking for a story that fit what I wanted to be, rather than the story that about what actually is outside myself.
Right, and we should be mature enough to recognize that if anything's worth it, it has to somehow transcend my priors. It has to be larger, than something that just fits all of my preconceived biases and notions. And, not to be too masochistic about it, but if it doesn't hurt a little bit, I know, we're in Lent, if it doesn't hurt a little bit, then it's somehow not entirely real or compelling. We know that we have to work against something, and part of that is our own, libido dominandi, part of it's all that stuff, right? But it has to call us to be better than we are if we're just left to our own devices. So, and I think that's what Peterson does.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I rushed home from Birmingham on Sunday was that morning, as I was getting ready to check out of my hotel and go to the liturgy, my wife texted me that a young man who goes to our church, a young father of a 3-month-old daughter and a husband, was killed the night before in a car accident. We don't know if it's drunk driving yet. It looks like it might be, but the police haven't said anything. He wasn't driving. He was a passenger in a car. Another young man died. And there's reality too, man. I didn't know this guy very well. He and his wife and their baby had started coming to church around the time COVID hit. Yeah. So we haven't been able to build the kind of relationships that you would normally have. Yeah. But to know that this could happen anytime. I got in the car after church and came right back home. And for us Orthodox, it was Forgiveness Sunday, which is how the start of Lent, when everybody in the church asked personally, face-to-face, forgiveness from every other person. And of course, I missed that because I was away. I went to my family and I said, this really shook me up. And to ask members of my family for forgiveness, as I always do on Forgiveness Sunday, it seemed to mean a lot more, because this was what we had seen in this horrible news from the wreck was a revelation of the reality of how fragile our lives are and how no man knows the day or the hour when we're going to be called.
That's right. We know not the day or the hour. That's that you need one of those moments, and it's like a cold shower.
So the reason I even bring that up is it's again another reminder to me, like, get everything right, live right now. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and so on, because we don't know what's going on. This sort of stories we tell ourselves, these lies, these comforting lies to avoid having to deal with reality. You can't get more real than dead.
That's right.
I'm trying to be optimistic. Talk about.
I know. See, you just, Ron. We're back.
As I like to say, optimism is wrong. Hope is not the same as optimism. Hope is finding the reason to go on despite the realistic fact that we're broken. The world is broken. Despite its vices, the world remains sunlit, though.
Right, and look, and I think that again, we live and move and have our being in this liturgical tradition, and these liturgical traditions allow us to get out of ourselves in some way, right? That we're plugging ourselves into this Lenten season, this preparation for the Passion, because we know that the preparation for the Passion is going to prepare us for the glory of Easter. And so I take this, it is ultimately hope, right? I mean, it is ultimately the season is preparing us for the death killer,
in the same way that, I hope this doesn't sound trite, but in the same way that I would not have been able to experience the blessing of being around people in Birmingham had it not been for the forced Lent of COVID isolation the past year. It made me realize how much it means to be around other people. And I'm glad God showed me that, gave me that.
Well, that's real. All right. Well, Rod, look, thanks. This is a good long conversation. I'm glad we got to have it. We're on a roll here with episode 11. You can find Rod at his blog on the American Conservative. You can find him at his Substack. You can find us both on Twitter. If you want to leave a message for the show, you can email us at thegeneraleclecticpodcast@gmail.com. You can leave a comment on the bottom of the video, and I try to get to all of those. All right, Rod, send us off, as you always do.
Okay, don't get nothing on you.
All right, you take care of it.